So the Fujifilm X line is the camera line that people think of when they hear Fujifilm. It's probably the most popular one because it has such a universal use case, but it's not the one the Fujifilm X system started with. That would be the X Pro one and XE one, both of which are rangefinder style cameras, easily spotted by the viewfinder not being in the middle of the camera like on most cameras, but on the far left side. It somewhat depends if you're in depth about current Fujifilm cameras. Maybe you're shopping for one or you're just looking at them from time to time. But if you are, one thing's for certain, that you probably know rangefinder style cameras are somewhat out of reach right now. You can only buy them used, and the current models, the X Pro 3 and the XE4, are both last generation cameras. They don't have IBIS, nor do they have the newer 40 megapixel sensor. And even though they're not current cameras and they don't match the specs of the current cameras, they're partly more expensive, or at least as expensive as they have been on release. But all of this is set to change, but we'll have to wait at least until the beginning of 2025. It is confirmed that Fujifilm is working on 2 new rangefinder style cameras that will be released in the future, as much as published by Patrick from FujiRumors.com. The first camera that's coming is the successor to the XE line, the XE5. It's confirmed to be released in 2025, and it will perhaps bring some interesting changes. Looking at previous camera updates like the X-T50 that was released not too long ago, I could see the 40 megapixel sensor as well as IBIS on this new XE5. This is great news for fans of the XE line because it means that the autofocus is going to be improved. Because the camera is mostly known as a street photography camera, very small and nimble, and it doesn't draw too much attention from people around you. And for that, when you're shooting scenes where people are moving a lot, the improved autofocus will come in very, very handy. Talking about autofocus though, there seems to be a problem with Fujifilm's 5th generation of sensors, that the autofocus is not working properly. There seems to be like a little bug that Fujifilm definitely has to address before they release a camera like this. Either way, I think the general design of this camera will stay true to the XE4, very minimal, but I do hope they add a little grip like they did on the XE3 back then, not like the XE4 because it's completely flat in front. Honestly, the XE4 looks amazing, especially without this grip in front, but the problem is that it's such a pain to hold, especially if you have lenses on there that are bigger than the pancake lenses from Fujifilm or the f2 lenses from Fujifilm. Also, unfortunately, I don't think they're gonna change much about the layout of this camera. I would personally love if they would bring back things like the D-pad just for more customization options, but it doesn't seem to be something they're willing to do, as you can see on the X-T50. And secondly, which personally I think is a bit more interesting, but also very niche, is that they will bring a successor to the X Pro 3, they will bring the XE4. We do not know a release date yet, we know it's not in 2024, but we do know that Fujifilm is working on it. And according to Billy from the FujiGuys channel, we know that this camera is going to be something very special. So what does very special mean in the context of a top-of-the-line camera that is going to be released at the earliest in 2025? This could range from crazy niche things like the camera being monochrome and therefore being able to capture high-quality images. It doesn't have the color filter in front, to a camera that is even more extreme than the X Pro 3, for example, one that doesn't have a screen at all. But I think very special could also just mean the introduction of a new X-Trans 6 sensor, whatever that may look like. A couple of other parts that surely will be added is something like IBIS, which is just a dream come true for every photographer that likes to shoot static scenes. There is something interesting I heard, but to be honest, complete speculation on my part, and not something I would specifically want, but something that may happen. The CEO of Fujifilm has explained how it's very hard for them to manufacture these double-use dials for ISO and shutter speed, especially on a grand scale. And therefore I could see Fujifilm opting for a 2-dial system on top of the camera, just like Leica does with their M11, where you have the shutter speed dial in the position where the double-use dial is currently on the X Pro 3, but have the ISO dial on the far left side above the viewfinder. Either way, the X Pro 4 will have to come with a bang, but more importantly even, it has to be available. Because the biggest problem with rangefinder style cameras like the X Pro 3, the XE4 or even the X100 series is that they're incredibly hard to come by. They're virtually sold out everywhere and therefore have way higher prices on the second-hand market. Just look at the XE4 for example. When it was first released in 2021, it cost about 900 euros new. Now, if you want to buy it second-hand in a like-new condition, you will have to pay at least 1,400 euros, which is just a crazy increase that honestly no one can justify. And it's purely due to the scarcity of these rangefinder style cameras. But why were the XE and X Pro line not updated in the first place? And why are these older models so hard to come by? That's mostly due to the parts shortage, which had Fujifilm solely focus on the more popular models like the X-T5, the XH models, as well as the X100V and now the X106. And even then, the X100V as well as the X106 are still incredibly hard to buy. And that leaves me with a question. Are second-hand rangefinder style cameras like the X Pro as well as the XE line popular on its own? Or are the sales artificially increased by the scarcity of the X100 cameras? And people therefore settling for the next best thing? I'm not really sure how to answer that question other than just waiting for these two new cameras to be released and subsequently seeing the sales figures. Anyway, if you want to find out about a truly entry-level camera that Fujifilm will release within this year, 2024, check out this video right here.